Good morning. So to begin with, I want to look at the scale of the marketing challenge faced, the key aims and the objectives. So for Pieta House, our marketing challenge is immensely complex. And it's not one that you're probably more familiar with, because it isn't about margin, it isn't about shifting product, it isn't about brand loyalty, and it's certainly not about competition. The marketing objective for Pieta House is to dramatically reduce the demand for our product and our services. And ultimately, our challenge is to eradicate suicide. In 2016, 399 of our sons and daughters in Ireland took their lives by suicide. And none of those should have happened. So our aim at Pieta House is to bring that number to zero. We know within the suicide prevention world that for every person who dies by suicide, there are at least 135 people who are directly impacted negatively by that death. They can be friends, they can be family, they can be partners, they can be colleagues, team members, but they all are negatively impacted by that. So in 2016 alone, there were about 54,000 people in Ireland who were directly impacted by the death of someone through suicide. Our ultimate commercial success then for Pieta House is the removal of the need for our services and ultimately the demise of our organisation. At Pieta House, we work with an issue, and this is really important, that was illegal until 1993 and was a mortal sin until the 1960s. So to put that in context for all the millennials, there is a thing called religion. It used to happen in this country. But a mortal sin, there are two major types of sin, a mortal sin and a venial sin. I'm not going to go through catechism with you because I don't know it. But a venial sin is one for which you can go to confessions, ask for forgiveness and receive forgiveness and leave with a clean slate. A mortal sin is a sin from which there is no redemption. It is a sin for which you are condemned to the fires of hell for eternity. I'm very conscious that I'm from the same town as Ian Paisley, and when I speak like that you might get a bit worried, but nevertheless. But we're talking about not even 2 generations ago. So there are people who very strongly will identify with that sense of not speaking about suicide, because who is going to talk about the agony of knowing or believing that their loved one is burning in the fires of hell with no redemption? Who is going to speak up about a crime that has been committed suicide? Because if you admit to committing that crime, you cannot benefit from the proceeds of crime. Therefore, you cannot get a widow's pension, you cannot access savings, you cannot get any of those things. So that's the country we were in up until 1993. Pieta House has existed since 2006. So our challenge of communicating what we do is very much shrouded in shame and shrouded in secrecy. What we do at Pieta House now is we offer 3 primary types of services. So we offer prevention services through education and training to try and build the resilience of Ireland and the people in Ireland to not need our services in the first place, to not become suicidal in the first place. For those people who are actively suicidal or do actively engage in self-harm, we offer intervention services where we literally intervene at the point of suicidal ideation, and through a process of psychotherapy we try and bring them to a new hope for their future. And we also work in postvention. Postvention is working with people who have been bereaved by suicide. So there are the 3 major types of work that we do. So in terms of the challenge that we had for Darkness into Light, the scale of the challenge is 3 years ago, the official figure of the number of people who died by suicide was over 500. 2016 it was 400, so you can see already there is progress. But it's an average of 10 suicides per week. And of those 10 people who die by suicide, 8 of them are men. So we have a massive challenge in accessing those men. And it's also important to point out that we have 3 times as many deaths by suicide in this country than we have road deaths. But we have nowhere near the resources in suicide prevention that we have in road traffic prevention. So this image, as you can see, is an egg. And the reason I have it up here is because I want to talk a little bit about what we do at Pieta House. People come to us in a very fragile state. They come to us in a point where there are fractures, but it's not yet broken. And the reason I'm using an egg is because if I give you an egg, there's a way you have to hold it. If you hold it too tight, you'll crush it. If you don't hold it tight enough, you'll drop it and it breaks. So what our therapists do in Pieta House is a very intricate piece of work of taking this fragile, fractured person and trying to bring them to a point of strength and stability and move them on. And if you incubate an egg properly, we know that inside that little hard shell, there is some new life. So that's kind of part of what we do at Pieta House. The vision of Pieta House is of a world where suicide and self-harm and stigma have been replaced by hope, self-care and acceptance. And what we do in our therapy rooms with our therapists on a one-to-one basis with clients is take their thoughts of suicide and replace them with thoughts of hope, and take their actual self-harm and replace that with actual self-care, tools for living. But the big challenge we have, and it relates specifically to darkness into light as well, is taking stigma and replacing it with acceptance. Because stigma is the single biggest killer in the country. The stigma of suicide, and you can understand that from the perspective of the mortal sin and the crime, but the stigmas that lead people to the point of suicidal ideation are huge. We know from the 36,000 people who have come through the doors of Pieta House that what brings them to our door is racism, shame, homophobia, transphobia, body shaming, other people's opinions on their net worth rather than their self-worth, their own self-loathing. This is what brings people to the doors of Pieta House. And these are the stigmas that we have to fight. Because if we can eradicate these, we can eradicate suicide. At Pieta, we have 240 of the best psychotherapists in the country working 6 days a week across our 15 centres. And last year alone, in 2017, 7,117 people came through our doors. Now, if you take that matrix of 135 people directly impacted, last year in Pieta House alone, 965,000 people have been spared the agony of a loss through suicide. The 965,000 people are in this room. We just don't know whether we would have been one of those people or not. But that's what our work is about. And that's why our ultimate objective is to no longer need to exist. So within Pieta, we know that we have to empower the country to take ownership of the issue of suicide and the stigmas that lead people to the point of suicide. But equally, we need to empower the country to take ownership of the solutions in suicide prevention and to support each other and network each other to eradicate suicide. So aligned to this is another huge challenge facing us, and that is the inevitable loss of public trust and confidence in the charitable sector. So when you get 14% of your funding from the government and the rest has to be fundraised, you really need trust and you really need confidence. And when you go through a process like Console and the CRC and all of these different things, the difficulties that we have are immense. So again, we need to communicate, we need to engage, we need to keep ourselves open and transparent, and finding a mechanism and a tool to deliver that is a very difficult thing to do. In the last 2 years, we've opened 4 new counselling centres, which incur significant additional cost, but ultimately we exist to serve a need. We need to identify the need and we need to serve the need. So cost is not something we plan, it's something we incur. So, to Darkness into Light, this is our flagship fundraising event. I'm sure you may, if you're here today, you probably do know what it is. And it's occurred every May since 2009. It isn't just a fundraising event. Just as importantly, it looks to drive conversations around the issue of suicide. And it also represents community hope and solidarity. From 2009 to 2014, Darkness into Light had grown to provide 1/3 of the annual income of Pieta House. In effect, Darkness into Light allowed us to keep our doors open and our services free for 4 months. The rest of the year we have to find in other ways. Growth of the event, while it was good, it allowed us to grow the participant numbers from 400 in 2009 to 65,000 in 2014. So huge impact in that. The event in 2014 was in every province in Ireland, and we had an income of 1.8 million in 2014. However, the growth had overtaken the ability to fully realise the fundraising potential and to generate as much activity, both in terms of discussing and generating the conversation, and in generating and raising funds as well. So to talk about the strategy adopted in terms of maximizing the impact of darkness into light. I started in January 2015, so what I've spoken about predates me. And one of the first things I did was a full systematic review of the entire organization. And interestingly, when I arrived in Pieta House, we didn't even have a fundraising department. We didn't have an advocacy department. We kind of had a department of money that looked after money in and money out. But we had some incredibly dedicated people and incredibly skillful people. So establishing the department was the first thing that we did. Looking directly at darkness into light, it was evident that the event as it currently was structured was completely at full stretch. All we had done was taken one event in the Phoenix Park in 2009, and we had replicated it warts and all across a number of different centres throughout the country. So it was important that we had to have a complete strategic rethink of the structures that delivered darkness into light. We needed to completely strip it apart and then rebuild it in a way that would be future safe. We also needed to rebuild it in a way that took it from being a 5K sponsored walk in Ireland to becoming an actual global movement against suicide. And there is a massive difference between facilitating a movement where people engage and own the issues of suicide and engage and own the solutions to suicide than just running a sponsored walk. So that was a huge challenge for us. We needed to educate and build the personal resilience of individuals and communities to prevent suicide and to generate further income, not just in Ireland but across the globe. So with the global vision in mind, we secured international trademarks for the event. And in 2015, we opened the first venues outside of the British Isles. We had a venue in London in 2014, but in 2015, we had walks both in the north and south of Ireland, across the UK, the United States, Canada, and Australia. And we grew the numbers to 70,000 people with an income of 2.4 million. So from 65,000 to 70,000, from 1.8 million to 2.4 million. So modest growth. The marketing and delivery of Darkness into Light needed, of course, to be completely restructured to engage much greater numbers of people in the movement and consequently in the event. So since inception, we had never ever communicated with participants in the event. The most they got was their ticket after they registered and a thank you. And in fact, 3/4 of our participants registered offline in paper forms. So the whole GDPR thing has been a nightmare for us for the last year, but we are on top of it, fingers crossed. But we had never communicated. So if you want a movement to engage and build the resilience of people, to equip them to become, I suppose in one sense, suicide proof, you have to engage, you have to communicate, and you have to allow a dialogue within that. So part of that was about encouraging them, sharing with them what the problems were, sharing with them what the solutions were, and asking them to engage fully in that process. In essence, what we wanted to do was hand the entire organization over and say, you own it. It is yours. Under charity law, that is the case. There isn't a penny that Pieta House holds that doesn't belong to the public. But to say that to people and say, this is your organization, this is your solution, but then to turn that round, it's almost like giving a hug and saying thank you for supporting Darkness into Light. But we realized we had to also give them a clip round the ear and say, you contribute to the problems. It is because of you that we exist to provide the solution, but it is because of your attitudes and either your direct actions or inaction that contribute to suicidal ideation in other people or indeed yourself. So that's a big challenge to give that message. So looking at the what we did to kind of maximize the campaign, we engaged a specialist consultancy in peer-to-peer fundraising. And very briefly, peer-to-peer fundraising, if you think of fundraising when you were a kid, you were given a sponsorship card, and the amount of money you raised was directly attributable to how far you were prepared to walk or allowed to walk. So you went round your family and you got them to sign the card, then you went round the street and you got them to sign the card, and then you maybe went to your scout den or your football club and you got them to sign the card. We all remember that. Peer-to-peer fundraising uses exactly the same principle, because the basic principle of that is people believe in other people and people support other people. You don't necessarily just take a cause. It's about who is engaged to that. So if you looked at my funding history, I fund more karate clubs than I do charities, but mainly because of my nieces and nephews. Because they say, we're doing a sponsored walk for will you sponsor? And I say, you're my nephew or niece, yes, I'll support you and I'll support that. So we needed to use that. So peer-to-peer marketing takes the same principle, but it puts it into a digital space. So rather than me being able to access you and funds within touching distance, I now use my network. So I can extend way beyond the borders of Ireland, and I can engage way beyond the people I know. Because you know that in Facebook, if you put up the post and say, I sponsored Brian Higgins for Darkness into Light, then somebody who is unknown to me may say, actually suicide prevention, I believe in that, I'm going to do the same thing. And that's our deliberate intent. The process of changing Darkness into Light to a movement has involved creating mechanisms where non-participants can also engage in the process. So Darkness into Light up until 2014, you had to be there to be part of it. After 2014, you can sleep in, you can be a part of it, you can engage in the process by communicating with us. You don't have to do Darkness into Light, but we can equip you with the skills and the tools necessary to enhance your own life and your own resilience. So key tools were online fundraising, online registration, regular communication by email and social share graphics, and more compelling messaging to build advocacy and support. Much greater use of social media. The role I had before Pieta House, I was a director of missing people in the UK. We worked directly in combating child abduction and missing persons. And each year we do a big tweet on International Missing Children's Day. So every hour we take an actual case of an actual missing child and we tweet it. And I know that my last year we found 4 children through the campaigns during the day. But a large part of that is using social media and using influencers. So we were able to get the Prime Minister, Richard Branson was one of our patrons, Stephen Fry was one of our patrons, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the internet, was one of our patrons. So we had a good people to rely on. We also had Simon Cowell and all of the X Factor and Britain's Got Talent. So it was about using networks to share those messages. So when there is a good idea, you steal a good idea and you bring it across. So one of the first things we did was we looked at our social media accounts and saw who follows Pieta House and who is working in mental health, who engages in these. So we reached out and made friends with the Rubber Bandits, Brezzy, GAA Stars. We also had Jeremy Irons, who does it every year in Cork, Sonia O'Sullivan, who does it every year in Sydney, Enda, who did it in Toronto for us last year. And so using these influencers, we also realized that using our friends' social media accounts, you can access more people as well. So you're looking at the wrong thing. You need to look up here. Okay? Yeah. So it's that William Shatner. And that's where you get that influence and where you can get people to really engage people with this. So we used invite reminders, we engaged people from the database that we had from 2016. This is where GDPR is so important, to engage them and set that excitement level for the year ahead. And we used we used a new marketing approach that looked at integrated print, TV, radio and social media. And with Electric Ireland and Think House and TBWA, we really succeeded in increasing our online registrations by over 50% to 126,500 people. And we were able to engage with them throughout that. But a number of insights were gleaned from 2 major pieces. One was the work that we did with Think House, and the other was a participant survey that we've done in 2015 and 2016 with participants of Darkness into Light. So we have over 13,000 people each year who engage in a full survey. And what we realized is we could be much bolder about the message that we give. Talking about suicide is very difficult. I'm conscious that I do it day in and day out. I'm conscious that some of you are very uncomfortable with the words that I use and would be very uncomfortable if I asked you to go out and share these messages. But what we did realize was people said it has to be said. It has to be shared. So we could be bolder in the messages that we do. And the key insight that we gleaned effectively is how we treat each other is a matter of life and death. It literally is a matter of life and death. What we allow people to say to you that we should intervene and correct, but don't, can have a negative impact. What we do say to you about your size, your weight, your shape, who you love, who you don't love, can have a negative impact. We have the ability to plant seeds in other people's minds that will rot and can lead them to the point of suicidal ideation. But while we have that power, we also have the power to ensure that we don't do that. We have the power to ensure that other people don't do that. And we need to accept that responsibility. So the key insight of how we treat each other as a matter of life and death allowed us to make a much bolder message. So despite all of the advances that we've made in mental health and suicide awareness, suicide is still an issue, and it is still a stigma, shrouded in silence and secrecy. And sometimes it is treated like a contagious disease, that simply by uttering the word suicide, you can spread it and you can implant it in other people. And that's nonsense. And that scientifically we know it's nonsense. So driving the conversations around suicide is absolutely vital. Engaging people in the conversations is absolutely vital. Providing words and images that they can use that allow them to be bold or gentle in their messaging is absolutely vital. So darkness into light, we've realized, is an opportunity for hundreds of thousands of people to come out in solidarity with each other and against suicide. And we knew that we had the ability to take this Irish event and turn it into a global movement. We've grown now from 9 centres in 2015 to 15 in 2017. Turnover has increased from 5.2 million in 2014 to 9 million in 2017. And our income has increased from 5.4 million in 2014 to 10.3 million in 2017. And while the sentiment towards Darkness into Light was positive and the awareness of the event was slowly growing, to be a significant source of much needed funds, we needed a really compelling marketing and awareness campaign. So, as I've mentioned, we used TV, we used radio, we used social media. But one of the things that we also did was, we have about 5,000 volunteers across the world that run the committees that organise Darkness into Light. And they are embedded in committees in communities across the country and across the world. So we had other messaging campaigns that were much more subtle, that we provided to them for church notices, for notice boards, for school magazines, for organisational magazines, for emails that they sent themselves. So equipping individuals to deliver our message in their own words is a very, very powerful way of engaging people. And one of the most significant insights for us is in 2015, our partners in the University of Limerick have done research into Darkness into Light and its impact on individuals. Specifically, the question was about how do you feel equipped to talk about suicide, and how do you feel equipped to support somebody who might be in suicidal ideation. And what they found, without going into the science, is that by taking part in Darkness into Light, because of the engagement process, because of the experience of being part of a movement, and because of the communication that we have with them, people's resilience is massively increased. Because they can talk about suicide, they know details about suicide, and they know that we exist free because of their participation. So they know that how to deal with it and where the support is. So we know that by taking part in Darkness into Light, lives are saved. So tactics that we looked at, throughout 2015 and 16, we undertook a really concerted effort to turn this into a global movement. So obviously that means going outside of Ireland. And what we did was we engaged very closely with the GAA and the Rose of Tralee. Unlikely bedfellows, possibly not, I've been at the festival, but we engaged with them because they are Irish institutions abroad that are deeply ingrained in local communities, that are deeply connected to non-Irish people in those countries. So in one sense, we used the GAA and we used the Rose of Tralee as the injection site with which we could access wider communities across the globe. And that has been really, really good for us because they have ready-made structures and mechanisms. They have all health and safety advice. They are localized in that. So that has allowed us to grow, and that's DIL Sydney. One of the things that annoys me about Darkness into Light is I share the social media work, and you have no idea how irritating it is to be sitting in your own bed, hearing the pissing rain lashing against your window and watching these bastards with their big smiley faces on Bondi Beach in the roasting hot sun and thinking, whoa, I have a day ahead of me. But anyway, so in 2017 as well, we implemented a number of new initiatives to optimize revenue and to mobilize our advocacy base. And they included the new website with full mobile integration and payment options in multiple currencies. One of the interesting things that we have found, and one of the challenges, is we outgrow our technology every year. So Darkness into Light is this year, 2018, we'll have 180 venues across the globe. We're from Australia, New Zealand, the Emirates, Europe, United States, Canada, right across the world. So what we have is an event that takes place in multiple currencies and multiple languages. Technology doesn't exist to allow for that processing to make it easy. So year on year we have to keep changing our processes and changing our systems. The one that we are using this year we have found in Australia. It's very good, it's very small, very bespoke. We have individual web pages for every venue, because one of the things, this isn't on my words but I keep saying it, I want Darkness into Light to be like Midnight Mass. Not in a religious sense, but because all of us here are aware of the concept of Midnight Mass. All of us are aware of the fact that this is a Mass, like any other Mass, but it's a bit more special. It's at night time. It's at a time when families come together. You know Christmas Day is the following day. The baby Jesus is brought into the church. It's a very special occasion, whether you're religious or not. You know what it is. The other beauty of Midnight Mass is it is exclusively yours. It's about your family and your community. It's a time when you go home and you see people you haven't seen from one year to the next. Darkness into Light needs to have that level of familiarity with it. It needs to have that ability to bring people together. It needs to have that ability that people want to engage in it and that it holds a special place for them. And just the other interesting thing with Midnight Mass is you can go to the Pro Cathedral in Dublin, or you can go to a tiny wooden church in the middle of nowhere. It's the same Mass and it's the same experience. So while you can do Darkness into Light on Bondi Beach, you can also do it in Cahersiveen, in the lashing rain, but with the same experience and the same importance and the same engagement. So that was an important one for us. We've directly communicated with 126,500 people with a staggeringly low unsubscribe rate of 0.4%. So that shows us that people want to talk about this and people want to engage in this process. We've accessed tens of millions of people on social media channels through our own Pieta House owned and managed channels, but also each of our venues have their own Instagram, Twitter and Facebook accounts. So providing them content to share the message has massively expanded that as well. On our own channels alone, we achieved 8.15 million impressions. Darkness into Light, hashtag DIL 2017, trended on 5 different dates across Ireland and globally on May 6th. Hashtag DIL Wake Up trended on 3 dates across Ireland and nationally at several points. Hashtag Darkness into Light, which is the one we don't want people using, but they all use anyway, trended on 3 dates across Ireland, the UK, and really interestingly, Vietnam. And Vietnam hosted an unofficial Darkness into Light. They will have an official one this year. But it's really interesting that they trended all day. Now, my understanding of geography is not good, but I'm sure it's not a tiny country. So for Darkness into Light to trend globally in Vietnam, I think is very significant. The value of our own social media, not including third parties, is estimated to be well in excess of €500,000. And an Ignite research survey found that 84% of Irish people believed that Darkness into Light really helped to destigmatise the issues of suicide in Ireland. And 91% believed that it raised awareness of suicide prevention support. The funds that we generated have allowed us to see 7,107 people last year. They've allowed us to respond to about 30,000 calls on the helpline. None of those people who have come to our door, none of those people who have called us have had to pay a penny for the services they received. None of the 36,000 people who have ever come through the door of Pieta House have had to pay a penny for the services they received. And that's entirely down to the generosity of the people who do Darkness into Light and the companies that support us throughout the years. We've provided funding for partner agencies across the world. Where we are in a country that isn't Ireland, we partner with another mental health charity and we leave a proportion of the funds with them to support people after the event is over. So we have done that across the world, UK, Canada, US and Australia. But most critically as well, we've contributed to a 20% drop across Ireland in the numbers of people who have died by suicide. Not exclusively down to Pieta House, but we are part of a national conversation and a national response. The HSE's National Office for Suicide Prevention report in 2016 showed 399 deaths by suicide. In 2015, it was 451. In 2011, it was 554. So our trends are on the right direction. But those numbers are quantifiable and they're provable. But the people behind them are not quantifiable. So of those people who die by suicide, we know that there are huge numbers of people who are impacted and who are struggling. And we know that none of those deaths needed to happen. So if you think of the 399 who did die in 2016, if you think of the 54,000 people who are directly impacted by those deaths, those people are our brothers and sisters and friends and family. They're our work colleagues, they're ourselves. And it's really important that together, through Darkness into Light, we as a society engage with each other and support each other. It's really important that we keep using this and building this movement to empower people so that we can build an army that will fight the stigma of suicide and self-harm, that will fight the stigma of mental health, that will fight the stigmas of racism and homophobia and transphobia and all those other stigmas that lead people to the doors of Pieta House. Because if people don't fight, we're not going to win. And this is a war that we absolutely have to win. And while I am very proud of receiving this award, I'm more proud of the work that is being done as we're sitting here now in our centres across Ireland. And I'm more committed to ensure that that will happen. And I'm also more committed to make your life a little less comfortable so that you fight on our behalf and draw your own little army around you. Because we can bring about zero suicide in Ireland. It may not happen in our lifetime, but it's something that we can contribute to. And the fight won't be easily won. So thank you very much.
Just in terms of teenagers and, you know, that whole cohort, which is such a big high risk, obviously, at suicide, I just wondered, is there an opportunity, is it something you've looked at in terms of transition year, you know, having a program or some sort of outreach to teenagers? Is that in your plan?
If you imagine a boxer understands where their vulnerability is, right? So a boxer who has a weak chin will hold his stance like this. A boxer who has a weak solar plexus will stand like this, and you will protect the area that's most vulnerable, and then you'll attack. The work that we do with the young people works in a similar principle. It says, look, you are kids. We want you to understand where your vulnerabilities are. So your vulnerability may be your size or your body image or your color. It may be your identity or your sexuality. It may be who your parents are. It may be the wealth of your parents or where you live or where you come from. It may be your accent. It may be your spots. So you understand in yourself what you are most vulnerable about. What's your big red button, and protect that. But when you're talking to all the kids, it allows you to say, so if you know that you need to protect that, and I know, because we're kids, we can figure this out, I know where your red button is, then if I can't continue punching you, you have to keep defending yourself, and you're going to try and punch me. So it's about working with them and saying, actually, we can create an environment in this school, and we can create a society where I acknowledge your red button and you acknowledge mine, and we agree that we're not going to hit them. And that's what the Resilience Academy is about. So it's not about directly talking about suicide, it's talking about how we build ourselves as people with the strength and resilience that we have. So we're rolling it out across a number of schools at the moment. We'll see, I think, about 3,000 kids across the country this year, and our intention is to expand that out as we go along.
And do the schools, how do they know about it?
That's a good question. I would need to talk to our guys, but I think it's advertised through schools and education programs.
Just, there's been a lot of talk recently about online bullying and how social media is having a negative impact on teenagers. What do you think big brands should be doing to combat this?
I think if a brand is deliberate in its cause, then there's a huge level of accountability on that. You know, I think brands should be realistic. Body image is a huge issue that comes through the door of Pieta House. Bullying over size and shape and height and all of those things is huge. So I think, you know, more realistic interpretation of the world is, we're not all the big bodybuilder guy in Niall's presentation, nor do we want to be. So I think a greater representation of what the world looks like. And actually, imagery is really powerful. So we have one of the things at Darkness into Light, I didn't mention there, but one of the things we've been able to do with Darkness into Light is create money we never had before. So if you think in the past, 2014, it gave us a third of our income, and then we had to find the other 2/3. So the ability to respond to needs and new needs and different communities, we never had it. In the last 2 years, we've been able to do 3 major initiatives. One with the travelling community, to see how our response to them could be better, because the suicide rates in the travelling community, particularly among travelling men, is absolutely huge, and we need to respond more appropriately. Our work with the autism community. So a lot of our therapists have said, look, we're working with clients. Our work is cognitive, so it's entirely about what you will remember from the last session to this session, and we begin again and move forward. We offer 15 sessions of therapy to everybody that comes through the door, absolutely free of charge. So it's important that you keep that pace to move people from that point of darkness through to that kind of light for the new future. But you have to connect. So what they said was there are a lot of people coming through, and we think they may be undiagnosed and on the autism spectrum, because our ability to pick up where we left off isn't there. And we're worried because we need to support these people. So we've done a huge amount of research with the autism community, and we've made some major changes. So you don't have to be diagnosed to come in, but our staff now have different tools. So some of them could be some people with autism being face-to-face directly, as Michael and I are now, can be very, very, very conflictual and create anxiety. But if we sit beside each other, it makes it easier. So some of it is as simple as that. Some of it can be the use of play therapy for adults as much as with children. But to go back to your question about what could brands do, for us we've realised we need to show that the people that we serve are the people we serve, and that there's a huge diversity across that. And I think the more diversity we can show, and by diversity I don't mean different hairstyles and, different clothing, I mean real people. I think it makes a difference. But also I think managing accounts, where people are spouting vile things, delete it. I do believe that this conversation around censorship and, oh, no, we can't censor comments. I think that's a load of bullshit, because those comments kill. So I think, you balance it out. What do you want, free speech or death? And I'm not saying that you cut out free speech, but where there is vitriotic bile underneath your post, remove it. Don't leave it sitting there.
I was just wondering, because the room is full of people in corporates, and I know you have also a corporate programme, and I think it might just be very interesting for people to hear a little bit about that while you have the platform.
I think the skills base that's in this room is a skills base that we normally don't have access to. My colleague Melanie is here, and this is the first time we've ever had somebody in marketing. I am not a marketer by background, but when you have a task to do, you kind of have to step up to the mark. But it's the first time we've been able to invest properly in that. And mainly that's through a journey of our own, of realizing that if we want to have proper advocacy and we want to properly engage people, that marketing is not about selling the product of Pieta House and getting money in. Marketing is about sharing our message and empowering people that they don't need us. So it's a hugely important role that we have. So from a corporate perspective, there are a number of different ways of doing it. You feel free to lend us your skills free of charge. We will gladly engage in that. But also, like I said earlier, we need an army. We need people to fight the suicide and the stigmas that we have. And we also want people to be supported. So you will work in offices, and I can guarantee you the people that you sit beside and see every day have either been touched by suicide or by self-harm. So there is an element of you can support each other by engaging with Pieta House in that sense. There is a program that we will reboot probably towards the end of this year, where we can provide training and resilience to corporates. But we're very proud of some of the partnerships that we have, and Electric Ireland is a phenomenal partnership. And I suppose maybe using that as an example, we don't have a sponsorship from Electric Ireland. We really do have a partnership, because there are Electric Ireland employees and ESB employees across the country who marshal at events, who engage in events, They host tea parties and all sorts of things to raise money and awareness. And we go in and engage and build resilience. And, you know, Andrea and Adele here could probably tell you as much about the work of Pieta House as I can, because there is a level of partnership and an understanding of what we do. So if you want to come into partnership with us, do. We would prefer a real meaningful partnership than a check with a nice amount of money, because the money we'll spend. But again, if you can help us not need your money, we're more interested in that. And I would say do give us a shout at any point.
Thank you.
Thank
Brilliant.
you.
Thank you very much.